Hi guys! Today we're gonna make moccasins together. Moccasins are for me personally the perfect and stylish barefoot shoes. And this year I started making personalized handmade moccasins with various motifs. So I have here, for example, these with a poppy blossom. These two pairs have a pet motif, so these ones are with my husky. I have here these with a boxing gym logo, so there is no end to creativity when it comes to these. Today you'll see how I make the moccasins as an overall product, and there will be a second video in which I will share with you the process of making the personalized aprons. I will link down below all the materials and the tools that are necessary for these, and of course also where I got the sewing pattern. And now let's start. So I have here the sewing pattern, and that is by Tony, aka Diesel Punk. I can link down below where I bought the sewing pattern. It comes in multiple sizes, so I printed out the size for my son's moccasins. Here we have the main materials. So I will make the main part of the shoes of this beautiful beige nappa leather. And for the soles, I'm going to use this dark shade. It looks like black on the camera, but in reality, it's a beautiful shade of dark chocolate brown. And I have here the shoe aprons. For those, I have used veg tan leather. I carved them and then I painted them with leather acrylic dye, and I went over with antique gel and sealed them with Resolene. I will not go over the process in this video, that will be a separate video, but of course you can make the aprons also of the same materials you would use for the rest of the shoes. This is just because I wanted my son to have something special. Now here I have this yoga mat, and in the sewing pattern there are these insoles. I will cut them out of the yoga mat and sew them between the layers, because that will make the shoes nicely padded. I started with the dark brown leather and positioned the soles and the edging as well as I could, so I wouldn't waste any material. I taped all pattern pieces in place. I used clear tape, but I find masking tape works better and it's less slippery. I did the same with the other pattern parts on the beige leather. Next, I taped the soft sole pattern on a yoga mat. Well, and then I pretended on camera I was also professional and cut the pieces out with a rotary cutter and a knife, while in reality, we all know I rather use scissors. Well, at least I had a cutting board underneath, so there you go. And then I took a small hole puncher and punched in all the holes on all the leather parts according to the pattern. To make myself look more professional again, I cut the piece that already had all the holes with a rotary cutter, but you can bet your firstborn that I used scissors for the rest of the pieces off camera. Then I punched in more holes in further pieces, and I decided I was over it and took my scissors officially. Honestly, they work so well on this soft nappa leather, so why torture myself, right? You guys understand. So here we have all the parts for the right shoe. So we have here the main shoe part, then we have here the sole, the upper edge and the apron, and this is going to be the inside sole to pad the shoe. I will be gluing it to this bottom part. So I turned the shoe soles with the wrong side up, and this is the way I will glue in the foam insoles. And I will do that with this glue. This is a really good sturdy glue for shoe repair and for shoemaking. I positioned these soft soles on the inside of the moccasin soles, and outlined them with a sewing crayon. Then I applied glue close to the outline on the inner side and then also a bit more on the space inside. I let the glue air out for about 10 minutes before I placed the soft soles into their final position. Then I turned the moccasin soles to the right side and I outlined the edge of the soles with sewing crayon. I went over the space inside the outlines with sandpaper to rough it up for the glue. I went in with the sewing crayon again to make sure the outlines were visible. Next, I cleaned the inside area with acetone. As a next step, I created the barefoot soles with a shoe repair paste. I traced the edges of the sole shape with the paste first. Then I kept filling in the inside area. I used a flat stick to push the paste in place so there would be no air underneath the material and the paste could bond perfectly with the leather. I made sure the layer wasn't thicker than 3 millimeters according to the instructions. After about 5 minutes, I covered the paste with a sheet of baking paper and rolled it flat. I cleaned the edges a bit and created a structure by simply pushing in a letter stamp of my choice. After a while, I filled in any sunken spaces, allowed the soles to dry for another 5 minutes before I went in with the stamp again. But honestly, my favorite thing to stamp in is a structure created by meat hammer. That works the fastest and it is, from my experience, the best. Alright, so we have all parts ready. The paste that I have used for the shoe sole is all dry, the glue is also dry, and now we can start assembling the shoe. We will start with this part because first we have to stitch together the heel. I threaded baxed leather sewing yarn into 2 needles. I created a cross stitch on the heel. Personally, I like having the crossed pattern on the outer and the straight lines inside. That way the stitch inside is flatter and there is a smaller chance of any rubbing. Once that was done, I started sewing the sole on the main shoe part with a saddle stitch. I have sewn the inside row on first. And then I proceeded with the outer row the same way. And here is what it looked like when the sole was sewn in place. I want to talk shortly about stitching the heel. The holes are here very dense and it can feel a little intimidating sewing this because it's such a weird angle. I find when I go in from the outside that the best thing is to kind of like flip it like so, and then it's easier to find where the hole where I just came through is, and then I make sure that I come back at the same hole on the outside, and then I pull on both sides of the yarn to tighten it, and that makes it for me personally easier. And I find once you get over this section, it gets easier again. It's just this corner that feels a little tough. So I have only a few more stitches to go, and then we are going to be ready for the next step.
The next step was to sew on the edging. I aligned the top row of the edging with the inside of the shoe, so the wrong side of the edging went to the wrong side of the moccasin. I have sewn it in with saddle stitch. Then I folded the edging over and I inserted a leather lace. I went with dark reddish brown because simply that was the one I had at home. Only after the lace was in place, I proceeded with sewing the bottom edge of the edging on the outside with saddle stitch. Otherwise, it would be pretty much impossible to put in the lace after the edging was sewn in. And then the moccasins looked like this. And then it was time to sew in the apron. I have sewn through the first holes twice to make the first stitch extra secure before I proceeded with cross stitch. The distance between the holes on the shoe leather was bigger than on the apron, which created the typical moccasin folds. I always tried to adjust the folds as neatly as I could. At some point the yarn runs out. I always stitch a few times backwards and then I cinch the ends with lighter or thread zapper.
Let's talk about a few things before I finish up the right shoe. As I am making these folds, this is what works for me the best. I always start with the yarn that comes from the top. Then I put it into the hole and make a fold and hold it like this with my finger. And as I'm pulling the yarn through, I'm making sure that I'm securing the yarn on the outer side, because that's gonna hold the nice fold in place. That's what's gonna give it this perfectly folded side. And then I'm coming through with the yarn that comes from the bottom, and then I come through, and if necessary I adjust the fold in order to look really nice and defined before I pull these two tight. So again, I'm gonna go with the side of the yarn that comes from the top, pull it through the hole, make the fold, connect through the corresponding hole on the apron, hold the fold in place, and then I tighten the yarn, I will still hold it tight with my finger. Now I go with the side of the yarn that comes from the bottom. I go through the hole, pull out, and I will adjust the fold nicely before I tighten both sides, and that's what makes the look really neat for me personally. This is what works for me. I like starting from this side because then I don't have any sewing back and forth here, and this is really secure on these sides. I usually sew up about till here to the middle, and then I sew a little bit back, and then I cinch the yarn. I thread my needles again, and then I come again from this side. Now that the shoe is finished, I can pull the lace through the holes. So what I like doing is grabbing the end of the leather cord that I'm using for the lace and kind of pulling on the shoe and making sure that both ends are equally long. And now I will thread the lace through the holes. I'm making sure that I'm not twisting it. So I go first from the top and then back from the bottom side of the second hole from the right. And I pull the cord through, and then I do the same on the other side. And since the leather cord is very stiff, in order to make it easier to tie it, I find the best thing to do is to make it wet. And now, since the lace is wet, it's much easier to lace it, and also once it dries, it's gonna stay in place and it's not gonna come undone, from my personal experience. Alright, so that's how I make the moccasins. In my next video you will see how I create the personalized aprons, and if you're watching this video sometime in future and the video is already up, it will be linked down below together with the sewing pattern and the materials and all the tools. Thank you all for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you with my next project. Bye!